Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Guns, Coal, Vaccines, and Abortion. East Kentucky meets Western Massachusetts, a Hands Across the Hills production. My name is Ben Fink, currently living in Massachusetts, one of the original participants of Hands Across the Hills, and it is my pleasure to introduce two of my colleagues. First, please say hello to Kip Fonsh from Leverett, Massachusetts, and his colleague, Gwen Johnson from Hemp Hill, Kentucky. And Gwen and Kip are also co-founding members of Hands Across the Hills. They have been involved since the beginning when we started this work back in 2017. And tonight, we are going to have what I think is going to be a really exciting opportunity to have a conversation that is both serious and real and not pulling punches, so to speak. But of course, you can't punch people over Zoom either. But at the same time, that is generous and open and genuinely curious with people who generally don't come together and talk with each other, right? I grew up in West Hartford, Connecticut, in a segregated suburb. And when people I knew wanted to pretend to be stupid, they would put on a Southern accent. How many of them have ever talked with a Southerner? Probably not that many. And that is what really has been so special about this time we've spent together over the past few years is, as opposed to talking about each other, we've been really able to talk with each other. If you don't know about Hands Across the Hills and the project that brought us here, not going to go into that in a lot of detail right now, but I'm dropping the website in the chat. And this conversation is being recorded, and that will go on the website. It's also being streamed on Facebook Live as we speak. And that'll be posted on the website afterwards, and you can go on the website, learn a lot about us and how we came to be and what we're doing, etc. But tonight, we're going to launch right into it. We're going to start with a little bit of story sharing, and then we will get into the meat and potatoes of four very challenging and important issues that the people in East Kentucky and Western Massachusetts often do not see eye to eye on. And then about halfway through, around 7:45, we will open up the conversation to stuff that is on your minds. We have got 90 participants right now. When it reaches 100, that'll be the cap on the Zoom. But if you know people want to tune in, they just go to that Facebook event and they can live stream it from there. And so if you have questions, if you want to watch it on Facebook Live, you go to that Facebook event. And I will drop that in the chat right now as we speak. And it should be streaming right from there. If you click live video, you should be able to do that. Don't try to pull it up on Zoom and Facebook at the same time, because it's about a 15-second delay, and that'll make you crazier than this conversation might already. So if you have questions, thoughts, ideas, it will be recorded. Yes, it will be on the Hands Across the Hills website, as well as posted to the Facebook event. And this is public conversation. Anybody can share it. And if you have questions or stuff that you would like Kip, and Gwen to address, drop that in the chat. And one of our colleagues is on the line who will be condensing synthesizing those comments in the chat. And then, like I said, at about 7:45, we'll start including those in the conversation. So drop stuff in the chat. We may or may not have time to actually do live questions afterwards. We'll definitely get to stuff by the chat. Or if you're on Facebook, we'll be monitoring the conversation and comments on the Facebook event page as well. So with no further explication, would love to introduce Kip and Gwen by way of a first question, which is, I want to ask each of you, and I'll ask Gwen first, if you could. First of all, you say whatever you like by way of welcome, and then answer the question, please. How would you, in 3 minutes or less, how would you describe the community that you live and how it has shaped the way that you see the world in terms of politics and culture, and the difficult controversial issues that we are wrestling with? So again, in 2 or 3 minutes, a little bit about the place where you live and how it has shaped you in terms of politics and culture and the challenging questions that we are wrestling with this evening. Gwen first, then we'll go Kip.
Yes, well, welcome everybody. Um, the community that I live in is a co-camp community, and I'm sitting in my mom's house, and it's a co-camp house that's a little over 100 years. The camp houses were built to house the miners when coal was booming, and then the company sold off the houses when the mine right up above the house closed. There used to be a railroad ran up the back of the house, and I interacted with the guys on the train as a kid. They would interact with all of us kids as they hauled coal up and down through here. My daddy was a miner. Both grandpas were miners. My mom had 3 brothers killed in the coal mines, and my little brother was killed in the coal mines, the only brother I had. Right now, we're trying to come back from the shambles left us when the coal industry has crumbled, because we've been in over 100-year mono economy of coal. And so we're trying to build back the best we can, but it was a job where someone could quit high school at age 16, go to work in the mines, and make shovel and belt make $80,000 a year. So it's hard to replace that with entrepreneurship. And we've been painted so horribly by the media all these decades that, with the poverty porn and all that, and that we are hostile. And I'm here to tell you, you're welcome here, and we're not hostile, even though we might be packing guns. But we'll talk more about that. But we got some folks on this call that can testify to the fact that they were not wounded or shot while they were here, and they stayed in our homes. So that's just kind of where we are. And in terms of politics, the things that happen to your people, and I know that's kind of cliche, but these are my people here. The things that happen to your people shape your politics and shape the way you view the world. And so my lens is probably very different from a lot of yours when it comes to the media and the government and those kind of things. And we'll get into that more. But the things that we have been able to agree on in Hands Across the Hills are the things that we all have in common. We all care about family. We all care about our community. We all care about each other. We want a better life for the kids. We want education for the children, food on the table, and those sort of things. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Thank you, Gwen. Appreciate that. And I will say, as a self-described communist Jew from the Northeast, I did live in East Kentucky for many years, and I do not have any bullet wounds that I'm aware of. And very, truthfully, no, I think that's really true. And the differences are real, and we'll get to them. So, Kip, same question to you. A little bit about the community you're in and how you feel like it's shaped you and your approach to politics, public life, and the tough issues we're here to talk about tonight.
Thank you, Ben. And thank you to all of you for being sort of in our home this evening, listening to this conversation. I hope you leave with feeling that you've received some sustenance, if not for the stomach, at least for the brain, and can go away thinking about what we talk about. I live in Leverett, Franklin County, part of the Upper Valley, Hampshire and Franklin County. I don't really think that I've been shaped by living here so much as my politics have been sustained by living here. My politics were formed, like many of my generation, not all, but many, by the war in Vietnam and Southeast Asia, and the political, social, and economic and psychological trauma of those years. And so my politics, such as they are, have grown and have been sustained by living up here, which is both good and bad. And it's good in that this is fertile valley for progressive politics. But it's also bad because it's, for some of us, it's a bubble. And it protects us from the outside world, so to speak. And I'm not sure that that's a good thing. One of the benefits of the Kentucky people opening up their arms to us has been that it's broadened my view of things, particularly coal, and the dependency on coal. And we can talk more about that later. I think that for me, the trip of the Kentucky people up here and our corresponding trip down there was a real eye-opener. It didn't change all of my opinions, but I think I understand the dilemma that the Kentuckians that we met face in their everyday struggles to survive, particularly when they've been really exploited and to use the vulgar term, raped by the coal companies. The coal companies have not done well by the people of coal country America, and that was pretty evident. And that was a powerful lesson. You know it abstractly up here, I think, but to actually see what it does to people's lives and to hear about, as Gwen said, the cost of lives in her family alone, multiply that by all of the families in Letcher County, and you get a staggering number that have paid the ultimate price for coal company greed. So it was an eye-opener, and I'm glad I did it. Like I say, some of my opinions haven't changed, particularly about guns, but we can talk about that later. Thank you.
Thank you, Kip. Let's actually go there, and we'll get to guns in a second. But let's talk about coal for a second, since you've already brought it up. And you know, my first night living in Letcher County back in 2015, I was at the Pine Mountain Grill in Whitesburg County seat, and I saw a woman coming out of a booth with a shirt on that literally said, "I heart coal." And I thought, okay, this is a different place than I am really aware of. And I'll tell you, and I want to address this first to you, Gwen, and then Kip, definitely interested in your perspective as well. It's been a tough thing for me to wrap my mind around. Even, you know, obviously I've heard lots of stories from yourself and many other people and got tons of respect for the sacrifices you've made. And as Kip said, you know, the ways in which the coal companies have, have messed you up. But the thing that I continue to have trouble with and be interested in hearing your perspective on this is, given how much the coal companies have messed people up there in terms of black lung, in terms of health, in terms of like the wages, in terms of, you know, what's happened to the environment and the land, but people are still so defensive and literally wear "I heart coal" shirts and put "Friends of Coal" stickers on their cars and all this. Help us understand what that's about.
She didn't mean she loved coal. She meant she loved jobs. I used to wear a shirt that said coal mining our future. And to me, it was prophetic because I didn't know what in the hell we were going to do without it. And we have had a dark night of the soul trying to figure that out, and we still have not figured that out. And the war on coal that they said was this mythical thing, couldn't prove it by me, because I felt like there was a war on coal, because I watched, I'm sorry.
No problem. Take your time.
I stood in the driveway and watched my daughter and my grandkids pull out to go to Western Kentucky, where they were still mining coal. And her partner couldn't get a job around here. And all he's ever been is an underground electrician. And so, you know, that's the thing that families around here faced. You know, the media has painted us as the people who don't want to work, and it's a lie. I think the videographers and the photographers rode into the community and wanted to work an 8 to 5 or a 9 to 5 day, and they found the dirtiest, low production families they could find because the other families were working. And that's who they talked to. That's who they could get to talk to. And so then they projected that out, and the whole nation thinks we're lazy and slothful and ignorant, when, you know, it's just not true, and it makes me really angry. But the jobs, to say that we love the coal companies, we don't. I sat in a guard shack the night my brother got killed, and the company wouldn't tell us anything. And my mother stayed on her knees in that guard shack praying that my brother was going to walk out of that mine all night long. And the company wouldn't tell us. And I believe the company knew he was dead from the time that rock fell, but they wouldn't tell us anything. It was in February, and it was cold. And my mom stayed on her knees praying all night long. And so how can you love that? But we do love the money that can be made. We always have booms and busts. When there'd be war times, they needed our kind of coal, the metallurgical coal. They needed that to melt the steel to make the implements of war. And so the coal miners were exempt from the draft. And, but the ones that were not coal miners, like in terms of the Vietnam War, there were more men drafted out of Appalachia than any other place in the country. And I believe that that was a government push because they see us as a disposable people, people that don't matter, people that are just a number. And, you know, a lot of our guys went away and went to that war and came back. And of course, we're never the same. Anyway, I don't know if that, I'm sorry I cried on y'all, but we don't love the coal companies, but we do love the jobs. And it's been a bleak outlook here without coal. All of our company, all of our county infrastructure, garbage pickup, every bit of the infrastructure in this county was run on coal severance tax money. And suddenly, with that war on coal, there was no coal severance tax money. And so we were trying to figure out, what the hell are we going to do with our trash? The senior citizens lost their senior centers. I mean, just the fallout from it was so tremendous, and we were all so depressed, and it just furthered the epidemic of drug use, because when they got out of work, they could get issued a free medical card if they had kids. So then the opioids just kind of took over.
We'll talk more about that later when we get to vaccines. Kip, I'm interested in how everything Gwen said sits with you, especially, I've lived in Western Mass as well. And, it's the land of the Prius, right? It's the land of people doing everything they can to really take climate change seriously. And I know that there is a lot of feeling like coal is something that we gotta leave behind, and I'm interested and curious kind of how that rhetoric sits with you, after not just what you've heard from Gwen now and what you've heard knowing Gwen and coming to Letcher County and meeting a lot of the people like you over the last few years.
Before I do that, let me respond to a couple of things that Gwen said, which I think are really important. Number one, actually, she didn't mention this, but I think it's important to the history of this country that we recognize that John Lewis and the United Mine Workers contributed a great deal towards the unionization of workers in this country. Mm-hmm. And while it was focused on the coal industry, nevertheless, it contributed during that period in our history to broader unionization of workers in this country, which is currently continues to be under attack and has been since the Reagan era. So I think we owe a debt of gratitude to coal miners who really fought the fight back in the days to unionize and to guarantee wages, good health benefits, et cetera, and jobs. Secondly, I want to mention the $80,000. It sounds like a lot of money. Sounds like a great deal of money, and it is. However, when you go down in the oil in the coal shaft, you have to understand what it's like to work down there. I don't pretend to understand because I never went down there to work, but you don't have to be a Northeasterner to understand the damage that black lung causes. You don't have to be a Northeasterner to understand and comprehend and respect what mine disasters do, usually due to the negligence of the mine owners and the coal companies. And so once again, you're at the mercy of people who just look to draw a profit out of the ground and in their wake leave some environmental and human damage along the way. So I think what Gwen is saying needs to be driven home. And it's watered, as you can tell, unfortunately, by not only Gwen's tears, but the tears of a lot of families. And that's the tragedy of coal country. As far as I'm concerned, a lot of people look to eastern, northeast states, particularly Western Mass and the Upper Valley as manna for education. And it is. I mean, there's, how many colleges and universities are up here? Why are we all here? Many of us, probably all of us, wouldn't be here if it wasn't for those places. But I have a bone to pick with higher education. Not that it's not useful, not that it's not important, but I think it has an impact on all of us. It certainly had an impact on me that I don't think we're ready to acknowledge. I came from a working class family, and not a poor working class family. I mean, we had food on the table, a roof over our head. My dad built our home, our house with his own hands. But there's a certain set of values that goes with that. There's a certain outlook on life. There's a certain perspective on life that is nurtured by that kind of an environment. I think it's the same for coal country. And matter of fact, it may be more intense in coal country because the traditions, the families go back multiple generations with coal. But my bone to pick with education is that it changes us. And it changes us, some of us, in such a way so that we're no longer what we were when we were young. We're different. We undergo kind of a magical DNA change. And that's good in a way, in that it gives us entree into the outside world and jobs that are reasonably well paid. But I think sometimes we lose sight of what we've lost in that quest and in that journey. And I think what's remarkable about Gwen's story and the hardship that her family and others like her have faced is that hasn't it hasn't destroyed the family bonds. The family bonds, despite the poverty, despite the deaths, despite the injury and the tragedy, and despite the neglect that our government has shown them, has persevered. And that's remarkable. I mean, you go down to Letcher County and generations live side by side. And they live in the same house. Gwen's right now in her mother's home. And that's remarkable, I think. How many of us have that kind of connection to our families that we can live in? I don't think we can do that anymore. And I think we've lost that. And I think that's important. Family is important to everyone. And I regret that loss.
Kip,
I managed to build a comfortable life for myself and my wife and family, but I regret that loss. Maybe I exaggerate it, but to me, it's real. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I was gonna, can I quote the thing that you said in our first dialogue back in 2017?
Sure.
All right, tell me if I got this right, but it stuck with me for all these years. You said, I went to college and I flunked French and I flunked Spanish and I flunked German, but I did manage to learn a way to speak that totally cut me off from my family. And I just think
that's basically it, man.
Yeah, I mean, it probably might have messed up the details, but that's just what we lose is so real. And that was my experience going to East Kentucky too. I've never known where I belong in the world. I was always get out, get out, get out, and achieve, achieve, achieve. Yeah, I'm gonna switch topics just so we got time, but we got lots of stuff we can come back to.
Can I just say one thing
Sure.
that I didn't say?
Absolutely.
We don't have an aversion to science. We know about climate change. We know about carbon emissions. We know all that. But at the end of the day, what does it matter if the planet's going to hell if you can't feed the children and clothe them?
Can I say one thing about
Of course.
Ben? The other thing that was remarkable to me, and I think is one reason, one of many reasons why Kentuckians look at coal differently than we do, is you can see the coal in the mountains. You can see the coal, long stretches, up one upon another as you ride through the mountains. It's there. And to not be able to get it and not be able to have jobs to get it out of the ground has got to be so frustrating. Put aside the environmental issues. It's there. And, you know, the frustration with not being able to have jobs to get it out of there has to be extraordinary. I understand the environmental consequences, I really do. But you can see this. And it must be devastating to people who've seen that, for them, wealth for the past 150 years, 175 years, go to waste. I'm done.
No, that's beautifully said, Kip. Like I said, much more to say. I want to take us now to 2018, Harlan County, Kentucky, just over Pine Mountain from Letcher County. It was the first time Hands Across the Hills met. We met in Leverett. We went up there in a van. That was October 2017. Then April 2018, we went down, the Leverett people went down to Letcher County. And we went over the mountain one day to Harlan County. We actually toured a demonstration coal mine. And then we went to lunch at the Benham Schoolhouse Inn. And I'm just really going to let the two of you all narrate this together, and feel free to just interrupt each other. Let's just say there was a little conversation about guns that happened at that meal. And Kip, Gwen, take it from here.
You want to go first, Gwen?
Go ahead, please.
Well, I'm probably twice as old as you are, so my memory's a little jaded, but forgive me. If you could fill in the spaces, I'd appreciate it.
I will.
I know you will. As part of the trip, actually, it was a visit to a coal mine that had been turned into a visitor venue. You go down, take the coal car, and ride down the coal shaft, which is really interesting, fascinating. But at lunchtime, we convened in this very large building, which had a large, I don't want to call it a cafeteria, but let's call it a dining room, where there were other people other than us in the groups who were eating lunch. And I'm not exactly sure, I don't recall, Gwen, how it came up, but I think I might have mentioned something about guns. And I don't recall the exact words I used, just kind of off the top of my head, flippant probably. And you made the comment that you thought that all the little old ladies in the room, in the dining room, were probably packing. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And needless to say, my response to that was, you've got to be kidding. What the, is going on? And it just struck me. It just struck me in such a way so that we had promised one another that we would not, this is the Trump era. And we promised one another that we wouldn't beat people up about voting for Trump. That wasn't what this was all about. This was about trying to understand people and where they were coming from, whether they voted for Trump or not. And I have to confess, I lost it. I didn't honor that pledge. And I guess you could say I went ballistic. You gotta be kidding me. What the hell are they packing for? Especially these little old ladies. And what proceeded was a very intense, a very contentious, and unusual for the trip, everything before the trip, okay? It was just an intense, contentious argument that went on between Gwen and I about guns. And I just could not for the life of me understand or comprehend. I could understand better why Gwen or others might have voted for Trump more than I could understand why sweet little old ladies were packing. And I feel the heat going up now. In the intensity.
Why does this make you so angry? Why the heat?
Because I didn't feel safe. Guns are supposed to keep us safe. That's what the talk is. You have a gun, you can fight off, you can shoot an intruder, you can shoot an attacker, you can defend yourself. I don't pack. I've never shot a gun in my life. Say what you will. I've grown up in the country all my life. My father, my uncles, my grandfather, none of them, people I knew, but none of them had a gun for self-defense. They had a gun for hunting exclusively, not even target practice. They just hunted. They put food on the table. But I did not feel safe in that room. And I think that's what really kind of generated my heat. What if I said something wrong? What if I did something wrong? What if I, could I trust that others would would honor the damage that guns can do. And I think that's what set me off. Plus, I also disagreed with the constitutional arguments.
Yeah. So Gwen, you got pretty heated as well, if I recall. So what did it for you?
Well, for one thing, Kip kept looking at Judy for reinforcements, and I felt ganged up on. I never told you that before, Kip. This is news to him right now.
Now you tell me. Now you tell me.
But I was raised up in a house that at one time, because of my dad's union work, the loft of this house that I'm sitting in right now was full of high-powered rifles. Because what they would do, my dad would tell me from the time I could walk, he'd say, the timber's getting green, them son of a bitches better watch. Now that's a hard thing to tell a little kid. My dad was also a gun trader, and he was also a hunter. My brother was a hunter, my grandpa, all my uncles. And so I have been around guns, could shoot guns, clean guns, take care of guns, tell you the value of a gun all my life from the time I could walk. So guns are just a part of my life because that's the community I come from. And just to back up a little bit to tell you why the loft of this house was full of high-powered rifles and why my dad would make the remarks about the timber getting green. They would snipe the motor blocks of the trucks that were rolling across the picket line, bringing in the scabs and hauling out the coal that were taking their jobs while they were trying to picket for those UMWA benefits that Kip mentioned earlier. And the UMWA, just a footnote maybe, the UMWA was never segregated. And so that's an interesting fact about that union. But because of his union activities, my mom said when I was a baby, he would leave the house and tell her, lay in the floor with the baby and don't get up. That was when I was a little baby in arms. Don't get up. And one night the company shot up the neighbor's car and shot through our house. So guns have always been a part of my life, although I have never killed an animal with a gun and I have never shot a person. But I have a conceal and carry permit and I carry it in my bag. And in fact, when Kip and I were having that discussion in that dining room, my handgun was in my bag sitting right at Kip's feet, but I never told anybody I had that gun. Now, when we went to Massachusetts, I didn't take my gun because I understood that would be taboo there and it would be frowned on. But I just wanted to say to you, Kip, you felt really, really afraid when I told you those guns were in there, although I didn't even tell you I had mine. I don't think I did I?
No.
Okay. I was afraid you would freak out with that one sitting right at your foot. But when we get visitors, we want to make them comfortable. We want to take good care of them. But if you get accosted where I'm at, I am going to take care of business. I'm going to say, hey, back off. You know what I'm saying? And so, Jay Frost told me something about, he said, if you come to my house, he's from Leverett. He said, if you come to my house, I'm going to try to impress you. He said, but I found out that If we go to your house, you're just going to try to take care of us and feed us and make us comfortable. And for me, you know, it's just a part of being comfortable. And where you were afraid, you didn't think anybody should have a gun. I think we all should have one. So that's a difference that we've got that you're not going to change my mind on that, and I'm not going to change your mind. But I love you no less. And that day at the lunch table, I got heated. I got hot under the collar. I thought about busting him right in the nose with my fist. I never thought about shooting him. Just saying. The conversation got intense. And when it got really intense, he came out with this thing about the Black Panthers. You remember that, Kip?
I can remember probably, I think I probably did, but I don't recall the actual statement. So I'll defer to you.
So you told me, okay, I've never heard this before. He said that, and I don't know, it might not have been the Black Panthers. He said that there was this group of African Americans. I remember it as being the Black Panthers, but it might not have been. And that it was open carry in California, and they went into a legislative session. Remember that?
Yes.
Carrying high-powered rifles. And I remember he said, do you think that, he said, I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember exactly how he said it, but he said, do you think that was right? And I said, if it was open carry, they should have been able to do it, but would I have done it? Hell no, because I'd have known they was going to drag my ass to the jail. So then when I researched that, I found out that they were trying to get gun control laws in place was why they did that. But that was the first time I had ever heard about it. And if I was going to try to push an agenda, that'd be one way to push it. Just saying.
I think
Go
ahead, Kip.
may I think there's a valuable coda to the conversation, and that is I'm really blessed with Gwen saying that she still loves me, and it's reciprocated 10 times over on my part. I think what's important to understand and is testimony to the progress that we had made in our dialogues up to that point was that Gwen and I hugged at the end of that conversation.
Yeah, we did.
And we're still on speaking terms. I think respectful speaking terms. And so
I've got him a Second Amendment hat.
We're in good health. I think it's important for people to know that.
I also think it's important to know that, because I know I get asked that question a lot. Like, how can you love those people that believe those terrible things that are destroying our country in those ways? And that has been, I think, one of the really most important learning experiences here. And I want to use that to shift into, I think, one of the hardest issues for people to love each other through, which is abortion. Because it's pretty deep and pretty existential. And, you know, you're either a baby killer or you are like disrespecting the rights of women to their own bodies. And it's one that goes real deep for a lot of people. And so what I want to do, Gwen, if I could, is you shared a really powerful story about this, and we were up in Leverett at the elementary school, and you know the sort of how you came to your perspective and your beliefs about abortion. And I'd like to ask you to share that story, if you would, and anything else you'd want people to know attached to it. And then, Kip, I actually haven't talked with you about abortion a lot, but I know that Judy, your wife, has got a very long history of very strong feelings about abortion and acting on them. And so, definitely, give you a chance to respond however you'd like to from your own experience after Gwen shares.
I actually, I am vehemently opposed to abortion because I had an abortion that it almost destroyed me. I almost committed suicide. Um, we take it serious, taking care of the kids, and just all the vulnerable ones who can't take care of themselves, the elders and the children. And I thought because that was legal, could be no big deal, right? But the next morning after I had that abortion, I couldn't walk, and it was psychological. And I went 3 or 4 weeks that I was in a deep, dark place. My family thought I had the flu. And it was my deepest, darkest secret for several years. I never told anybody. And I carried it with me, and it was the thing that kept me awake at night. And I just don't think there's enough education around it. I think when you go in for one, I was just kind of, it reminded me of a cattle chute, actually. Really, it was just, and I talked to women there who were using abortion as a form of birth control. And then one abortion did that to me. And so I know that people have a right to do what they want to with their body. And I thought that since it was legal and since it seemed to be progressive, that I could do it and that I wouldn't have any complications from it, but it was not true for me. And so just like with guns and just like with coal, there's not a one situation fits all. There's not a one way fits all for any of us. I think according to where you live in this nation, it shapes your politics and it shapes the way you think. And it definitely shaped the way I thought about that. I mean, I have 2 grandchildren that I dote on. I went to a ball game and was late getting on the call with Ben and Kip because my granddaughter was having a ball game, and I would not dare, if I can keep from it, miss an event with those grandchildren. And then I thought I could have an abortion with no fallout. It was just the deepest, darkest secret that I had for so many years.
Thanks, Gwen. Kip, how's that all hit you?
Me?
Yeah, you.
Well, I'm a white male, obviously, with all that embodies. A lot of baggage you have with that when you start approaching these kinds of issues. And I've been fortunate in my life that for the past 50 years, I've been married to a woman who has, since I first knew her, has advocated for women's rights, particularly abortion. And she's made me understand the importance of it, the reality of it, both good and bad. Gwen's not the only one who, and I don't mean to cheapen or disrespect Gwen's experience, but there are women who have had similar, if not worse results, women who have died from illegal abortions. And so what I've come to learn or believe is that there's no unanimity about when life begins. I believe, I'll leave that to the scientists. For me, it begins at birth. And so consequently, for that and for other reasons, I believe every woman has the fundamental right to decide what happens to her body and what doesn't happen. And legalized abortion, to me, means that women don't have to go into the back room and have the coat hanger abortion, which is cruel, very cruel and deadly. And I think one of the things, I don't think I've ever told Jude, my wife, this, but one of the things that really drove home my belief that abortion is a fundamental human right for women is after we had our 2 daughters, we talked about having more kids and decided not to. So I went for a vasectomy. And I just walked into the office, scheduled a vasectomy, had the vasectomy, walked out. No questions asked. There was no group of people in front of the doctor's office screaming at me that I shouldn't have a vasectomy. Think about all the children that I could help be born. I didn't have to go through that experience because I'm a man. But I still took an action that would prevent me contributing to the birth of more children. And I scratch my head and I think, well, okay, I'm a man, that's a, what's the difference? I mean, we know what the difference is, but come on, shouldn't a woman have the same right? The same fundamental right to do what she wants with her body. End of conversation.
Gwen, curious if you got any response to that.
I don't have really any response to it. I know there are a lot of different situations and attitudes surrounding abortion. I would definitely try to talk somebody out of it if they came and talked to me first. Roe versus Wade. Do I think it needs to be overturned? I don't know. It's a hot topic and there are situations that it might not fit. But I am opposed to any woman having the pain and the tragedy that I felt.
Lots of questions in the chat. Thank you, Gwen, and thank you, Kip. Both shared sensitive stuff and sort of led us into some tough places. Lots of questions in the chat, and we'll go back to some of them in a little bit. But speaking of tragedies, of course, we're all living through one right now. And I would say, as a, I'm also a white male, and a, Northeasterner with an advanced degree, probably of all the four issues we're talking about, the hardest one for me to see both sides of, frankly, is vaccines. Like, I get the stuff about coal if it's your livelihood. I get that guns can keep you safe. I get that, what you were just saying about abortion and how people think of it. But I mean, vaccines seem just to me to be just such a miracle. And yet I know there's other perspectives, and I've read your writing on it, Gwen, and I think it's beautiful and compelling and important. And I want to get that perspective. But I want to give Kip a chance to talk first on this one, which is, I'm curious, we've talked about this some in Hands Across the Hills dialogues, but we haven't, not in great detail. Like, what is your feeling when you hear about, people that are saying they, will not get the vaccine, they don't trust the vaccine, they are, variously kind of anti-vaxxer? How does that sit with you? How do you feel about it? What kind of questions does it provoke for you?
Well, on the one hand, I think, as it is with abortion, people do have an individual right, I suppose, to how they take advantage of healthcare that's available to them. But for me, it's much more personal than that. Very personal. A year ago, this past March, I had a heart attack and triple bypass, and the wonderful doctors rebuilt my aorta. And while I almost died on the operating table, I'm here. And I'll be damned if anyone's refusal to get a vaccine is going to put me in danger. So while I respect people's choice, I think we have to understand that there is a social contract that we have with one another that binds us together, and that individualism goes only so far. And that at some point, our behavior must recognize that there are others who may be threatened by that behavior. And so, as with guns, as with freedom of speech, as with all the other rights, nothing's absolute. And while I think people have a right to question the vaccine, maybe somewhere deep in their soul, they believe they have the right to refuse it. But I do believe in the social contract. And I think there's an obligation of each and every single one of us to do what we can to protect our own health and the health of others. And when I see photos and video of people carousing in large groups in Florida and elsewhere without masks, what are you thinking? Okay, I'm not going to go in that group. But the virus is so insidious and so dangerous that it doesn't mean that people who go maskless and vaccineless in Michigan may not have a consequence for us here in the Northeast. Because people move about. And this is an extremely insidious, dangerous disease that is capable of mutating and mutating with variants that some of the science says are even more than the original COVID-19. So, at some point, I have to, I guess, violate my own principles and say, spare me the individualism. Get a vaccine. Put the mask on until this is over. Because without doing that, you're endangering me, because my immune system, I'm not as strong as I was. And I don't want to die. I'm not ready to do that. Thanks. They gave me another chance, and I'm going to take advantage of it, damn it. So don't do that to me. And don't do it to yourself.
Thank you, Kip.
Done.
Yeah, yeah. Gwen?
I think when Purdue Pharma dumped all that Oxycontin in these mountain communities in Appalachia and used us as a human testing ground, even though human testing is illegal. When they dumped it out, you know, it was touted by the Herald Leader, which is, you know, I guess the biggest newspaper in our state, as hillbilly heroin. And there was some research done, and they found that 86 Oxycontin per week were dumped in Appalachia for every man, woman, and child in Appalachia. And suddenly, we have mass incarceration and grandparents raising grandchildren, and the whole fabric, you know, nothing. And you talk about guns, okay, nothing was sacred to those people that was hooked on that drug. Nothing. They stole priceless antiques and family artifacts, and they're now gone because I lost some of them myself. They're gone because they sold them for paltry amounts to purchase that drug off the street, because it was readily available on the street with all the over prescribing that was done. And so if we as hillbillies are slow to take the vaccine, and let me just say, I've had 2 doses. If we're slow to take the vaccine, it's because we don't trust the pharmaceutical companies nor the government. Because that Oxycontin should have been regulated by the government, and Purdue Pharma shouldn't have made the millions and millions and millions that they made off my people. And so if we're slow to take the vaccine, and we're not the only ones, I mean, people of color have been greatly exploited in this country too. And there was, you know, when I was hearing the statistics on it, to be honest, I wondered, are they withholding those vaccines from people of color? Or are those people of color like we are here, and we're cautiously watching and gathering information and watching our neighbors that did take it to see what is the long-term fallout? Because that's where we are. So, you know, it was not ignorance per se. It was not necessarily that we're just so backwoods, we weren't worried if we endangered somebody else. No, that wasn't it. It was that we didn't want to fall prey to the wolves once again. Because a lot of people have given up responsibility for their health care to the doctors. And look what happened with the Oxycontin. A lot of doctors come to Appalachia because they get forgiveness of their student loans for practicing in a poverty-stricken area. And so we don't always get the brightest and best. A lot of times we're getting those who want to pay off their loans really quick, and they are not invested in our area or the people. And so a prescription pad in the old days, but now they email them. But anyway, that has been a means to get money, because if you were known to be the doctor that would prescribe it, you didn't have a waiting room big enough nor enough days to practice to get them all in there. because they were lined up all the way out in the parking lot because they were hooked. That drug was made for terminally ill cancer patients. And suddenly all over these mountains, it was being prescribed for a migraine headache or a knee ache or, joint pain or, just minute things. And they tell me that if you take 2 of those this week, next week, you'll have to have double or triple that because you get hooked that quick. And that's what happened to us. And so if we've been slow to take the vaccine, which I think people have stood back and watched. And, I did a survey of people just that came in the bakery. We have a little bakery at our community center, and it's how we keep the funds there. We do some second chance employment, and it's how we keep our community center utilities paid and that sort of thing. Do a little more community outreach than would be possible, because all that co-severance tax that we used to run on, it's now gone, as I mentioned before. And so people would come in and I'd say, hey, you think you're going to take the vaccine? And they'd say, no, I'm gonna wait a while because I think they rolled it out too quick and I don't trust it or whatever. So that's all.
So
Ben?
go ahead, Kip.
If I may.
Yeah.
Gwen, will you finish? I just want to say to Gwen that, and this is going to sound like empty rhetoric, but I understand what you're saying. Don't get me wrong. I also understand, at least abstractly, why African Americans, Black Americans don't trust the government and vaccines because of, among other things, Tuskegee. We know about the I don't know what you want to, the sins of our history. We understand that. We know that. And we'll never be able to live that down. But I respect your position. I really do, because I respect you. But I would like you to talk about, you used a couple of words in your conversation there, in your remarks, that I've learned that they continue to bother me. You use words like backwoods. You use words like hillbilly. And, I don't pretend to be an honorary Appalachian resident, but I find those offensive. And I know they're words of pride to you, I think. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. But I think to many people, they're derogative and they get the wrong impression from that. For example, hillbilly elegy. Can you feel comfortable making some comments about that book?
Yeah, J.D. Vance doesn't, he didn't coin the phrase. He stole it, so to speak, in my opinion. But, he was someone who spent summers, as I understand it, at his grandparents' house in Breathitt County, which is a couple of counties over from us. But no, I feel like I'm just going to put it out there. I feel like he was setting himself up to run for office, is what I think. I think he wrote that book, and I was, I've been present at some events where there's been discussions of that book, and all the locals that I've ever talked to hated that book. And so I feel like he was somebody, a privileged person, a privileged white guy outside our culture, trying to write about our culture. And though some of it rings true, when you read it, I got a copy of it in my bedroom. Some of it rings true, but some of it paints us in such an ill light, that I take offense to the fact that someone in his position would be writing such a book from the city. Just saying.
Gwen, can I ask you also to the bigger, I'm sorry, Kip.
No, I was just going to say that I think the word is used to label a culture and or a subculture. If you, I'm not sure which, but there's a cultural aspect to those terms. There's music, there's art, there's language, and so on, religion, to that area of the country. And I just can't help but think that there's a better way to refer to a culture or a subculture, whatever we want to call it, that is so highly valued both by the people who live it and by many people who experience via music. You know, there's a lot of people in the Northeast who listen to music from Appalachia and love it. But can we call it something other than, can we call it something that's not to many people derogatory?
I think
I'm going to jump in because we want to start responding to some of the questions. And so, yeah.
Can I just respond to that really quick?
Exactly. I want to ask you, Gwen, first of all, do you consider that term derogatory? And second of all, are there, I mean, how, what is kind of the stakes of, taking offense at the stuff? Go ahead.
I don't take offense to it.
Uh-huh.
I think that I think the stereotypes that the media has pushed about Appalachia has caused you to think those are derogatory terms. But to the locals, those are not derogatory terms. And I can't speak for everybody, but I take pride in being backwoods, and I take pride in being a hillbilly woman. So I think it's the stereotyping that has pushed that agenda.
Really, really interesting point. Thank you, Gwen. I'm going to bring, and great stuff happening in the chat, going to bring out a few questions to ask. So Gwen, I think is an interesting question. Kip was saying he felt unsafe, thinking about all the people with guns around. Do you feel unsafe when you didn't have your gun with you when you were up in Leverett?
No.
How come?
I didn't, because I'm just generally not scared.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'm just too I don't know, maybe I'm too stupid to be scared, but I'm not scared. I feel safer when everybody has a gun. I'll give you a scenario, tell you a little story. Remember when the Batman premiere out in Colorado, I think it was, there was a shooter went in the theater and gunned down a bunch of people.
That was awful.
The next time I took my grandson to the theater, we were getting out of the car and I slipped my handgun into my pocket. And he said, "Mama, what are you doing?" And I said, "A shooter comes in this place, he ain't gonna have a prayer." So that's just how I feel. Somebody, I don't want to hurt nobody, but I don't want to be hurt, and I don't want innocent people hurt. So that's just where I'm at.
Let me pulling in another question. This notion of personal choice versus what the government tells you to do. It is interesting in the way that it cuts across a lot of our beliefs. And we got at this a little bit before, right? So that, Gwen, you were saying that, personal choice in terms of the vaccine is important because again, for legitimate reasons in terms of people have been screwed and lied to and all that beforehand, but maybe not so into personal choice about abortion, that you said that it shouldn't, at least I heard you saying, unless I heard you wrong, that it should be illegal for anybody, and vice versa. That Kip, you said that abortion should be, a choice, and several people said that too in the chat. It's between a woman and a doctor, or anyone who's bearing a child and a doctor. But that vaccines, yeah, not so much. Everybody got to do that. So yeah, curious, maybe Kip first and then Gwen. How do you square those things?
It's an excellent question, Ben. And I'll have to confess, I'm not always consistent. I suppose you could say that it's situational ethics, I guess. But, abortion to me is an individual choice because there's only the woman involved. The vaccine and the mask involve everyone. There's no one who is immune from getting COVID. It's the kind of virus that can get you anywhere. The vaccine, we hope, and maybe that's what I'm saying, I hope, that it will protect us. But it also has to protect us from one another, because each of us is a potential carrier of the virus that can infect someone else. And that's a very different situation from a woman who's choosing to have an abortion. There's no other person involved. And so I guess I'll stop there.
Cool, thanks. And let me just say before Gwen responds that I think the only people I've ever known to be consistent in their beliefs are psychopaths. So definitely not faulting you or anybody else for being inconsistent, because I think that's part of being human.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Ben. I appreciate
that.
I mean,
I just, as far as I know, you're not a psychopath. Maybe I don't know you well enough. But yeah, seriously, Gwen, what do you make of that sort of seeming contradiction?
Well, my mom was, okay, so I'll tackle the vaccine first. My mom was she tested positive on January the 11th, and I quarantined and helped her in this house for 14 days. During the 14 days and thereafter, I was tested 5 times and I never tested positive. But when the vaccine became available, I went and took the vaccine because, number one, it's important to me to be able to travel. And I was afraid that they would put rules in place that you couldn't get on a plane or whatever if you didn't have that vaccine. And I want to go somewhere. I'm sick and tired of sitting here. I want to take a trip, or more trips than one. And so that was my reasoning as well. I don't want to expose anybody to that virus and be a carrier of it if I can keep from it. And so I think the number one way to do that is to take the vaccine and wear a mask. But that being said, we've got a crew at the bakery, and I did not require them to be vaccinated. But I did kind of sort of hold their feet to the fire because they were wanting to open up the dining room and get music back in that place. And I said, we're not doing that unless everybody's vaccinated. And so they all lined up and got their shots. And now the whole bakery crew has 2 vaccines. And we opened the dining room last week. And Saturday night, we had music. Live music for the first time since the pandemic started, which was really exciting for us because we've missed it really bad. And then in terms of abortion, if somebody can, I'm not going to protest outside an abortion clinic. Okay. I'm not going to do that to cause people and say, hey, don't do it. But if somebody comes and tells me I'm pregnant and I'm thinking about an abortion, I'm going to talk to them very candidly about what happened to me and explore some things, because I don't think, I mean, and I think this about guns too, I don't think there's enough education around those things. I mean, certainly I make sure the kids in my family get hunter safety classes and that sort of thing. So then why aren't we making informed choices about abortion? Why wasn't I making an informed choice about abortion? It was not the choice for me. And so it's not, I mean, I'm not going to protest. I'm probably, if there's a pro-life candidate, I'm probably, if the rest of their platform fits, I'll probably vote for them just because of my experience. But I'm not trying to limit that. And I know that there have been crones with twigs all down through the ages. I know that. I felt like I had been to see the crone with a twig, just saying.
Absolutely.
Did that answer it, Ben?
Yeah. I mean, I guess the question is, people were saying in the chat about how, you spoke really powerfully about your own experience and how it was something that that was not a good experience for you. And what I heard people saying is that, right, other people have different experiences. And I guess that's where you were saying about, kind of you're not being sure how you would, so your approach to Roe v. Wade, like if that should be everybody's, if that should be dictated to everybody. And am I right in saying that you're kind of ambivalent about that?
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense. Lots of other great questions. Yeah, Kip. Yep.
My mom had 2 miscarriages before I was born. I feel lucky to be here. I'm glad I wasn't miscarried, but I'm not going to blame my mom for the heartache that she went through for those 2 miscarriages. And she went through heartache. I remember, as a young boy, still experiencing the heartache and depression that she experienced having those 2 miscarriages. They devastated her. But it's not my place to say to a woman, you can't have one. That's not my place. Mm-hmm. You can't have an abortion. That's not I don't have that authority. I don't have that power to deny to another person what they should or should not do with their body. I just wanted to say that.
So when my mom had COVID, I was here and I obviously had not had COVID. And so some of my friends from Leverett got together and raised some money and called and said, hire someone who has had COVID to stay with her and get the hell out of there. We're going to send you this money. You rent a place if you have to, do whatever you have to do to get out of there. And I was really, really happy that they loved me that much because they were going to send $2,000. I was happy that they loved me that much, but that's not how we roll around here. And so, around here, we take care of somebody that's sick. We just do what we can for them. If the hospital won't have them, because, there weren't any beds at the hospital or anything, I mean, somebody has to stay with them. And I was already living in the house with her, so I'd already been exposed. So if I went somewhere else to stay, I would have just exposed more people. And so I think there are some cultural differences that make these things really murky. And abortion is one of the same kind of things. You know, um, somebody might could go and have one and go right back to work and no fallout and no mental shit like I went through. I was not wired that way. And I think it was because of upbringing and conditioning and uh, all of those things. And I'm not saying it's right and that thinking, and I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that one size fits all that we talked, that I talked about earlier, it does not fit some of us. And when the government, I won't go into all that, but I saw in the chat somebody said that it wasn't a political issue in some countries. It was between the woman and the doctor. And I was like, wow, you know, it'd be better. Just saying.
That's a big thing. That's a big thing that you just said. And there is so much more that we can explore here, but I know we're almost out of time. So just want to say one of the things that I really respect and admire so much about you both is how you are not just willing, but excited to open up and learn from each other and take and think about a position and an experience that is not your own. Because that is not what the exploiters, the people that came in and took the coal in East Kentucky, and which were some of the same people that came and take the mill labor in Western Massachusetts. It's not what they want us to do. They want us to be scared of each other. They want us to think of the other as just, impossible and incorrigible and intractable. So the only thing we can do is fight and hate and fear. And just the two of you are just such a living embodiment of the fact that this can be done differently. And so want to thank you for everything that you've shared here tonight. We can stick around a little bit, probably if people want to talk a little bit more. And I think, but yeah, if you want to get more involved, this is obviously one thing in a much longer process. I'm going to put handsacrossthehills.org back in the chat. If you want to know more about what we're doing, you go onto that website. This session will be posted soon. Please feel free to share it. Also, there is lots of other resources there, other video recordings. There's a full 90-minute, hour-long dialogue with multiple people from both communities recorded recently, a whole bunch of media. And if you want to be informed about more events like this as they come down the pike, please sign up for the mailing list. We do not spam you, but we do keep you informed about what's going on. And so thank you so much for joining us here tonight. Thank you for spending this time with us. And thank you most of all for Gwen and for Kip opening yourselves and sharing with all of us. Feel free to leave some more thoughts in the chat. We'll stick around for a few. Otherwise, have a good evening. Thank you so much for coming. All right.